Well, this is something that I'm very passionate about, and I mean, where to start? I think that people get really silly when they talk about the Supreme Court, particularly liberals who have this kind of fantastical narrative. Ben was talking about a little bit of the Warren Court, but also, like, let's not forget, why is the Warren Court doing what it's doing? It's in a social and political context where these things were becoming effectively the most popular political, positions amongst people, right? And it was a unique time that was reflective of like the social movements on the ground, right? And it was good that in that moment you had a court that, because of its makeup, was very interested in sort of preserving certain things and extending certain things. But even like think about Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade doesn't come out of a vacuum. Roe v. Wade doesn't happen because one day everyone decided that abortion is going to be the law of the land. Roe v. Wade happened because there were massive amounts of social mobilization, social protests, and a very successful movement to codify the right to abortion in states across the country. And that really was just the final push. But it shows, like, even in our successes, I guess, as like, people who want, social rights and human rights preserved for people, that it's always sort of temporary when you're dealing with the Supreme Court like that. So it's not necessarily like the best strategy for achieving these things. And if you look at the Supreme Court's history, whenever I talk to people when they get mad at me for being against the Supreme Court, they say, well, the Supreme Court, they're really here to make sure that the majority can never attack the minority. And I'm sorry, if you look at the Supreme Court's actual history, the minority that they've been interested in protecting has been rich people. And that goes all the way to the very beginning. As to the actual question, which is like, what should we do about reforming or getting rid of the Supreme Court? I say, look at history. Remember that the right of judicial review was something that was taken by the court, and I think that should be a live political question. Our friend Matt Karp at Jacobin, we've had him on Left Reckoning. He's written a lot on this, obviously. He makes the great point that, when Lincoln became president and tried to, free the slaves through the Emancipation Proclamation, do you think that those boys on the Supreme Court were very happy or interested in seeing the end of slavery in the United States? No, they said they're going to stop that from happening. And you know what Lincoln and the radical Republicans said to the Supreme Court? Thank you very, very much for your legal advice. They moved on, and they changed this country for the better from that. I think that, the current political terrain, we're not in that position right now, but that's something that we should be educating and like having a part of our platform so that people are prepared for a moment when we can deal with that. As to like kind of, liberal squishy things of like what we can do, I think that we should just be waging campaigns to weaken the power of the Supreme Court in general. Like if I were to have my way, if court packing is what they do, again, I don't find that to necessarily be a solution, but if it sort of invalidates the holiness of the Supreme Court in a lot of American voters' minds and sort of weakens it as like a first stage in us weakening their power, I think that could be helpful. But last thing, I don't think that you have to make an argument from all of our kind of, socialist principles necessarily on this. You can really just focus on democracy, that in a society that says we believe in a principle of one person, one vote, that we should have our ideas and our hopes and things like that reflected in that democratic act. We shouldn't have something that sits above the legislature, and the legislature should be seen as the highest power in the land. That goes for the executive branch too. I know it's a radical argument, but it's a deep-rooted argument. I mean, this goes all the way back to the founding, that people were very worried about executive power and judicial power. They set up a system that was very much set up to keep the people and the rabble out of government. I mean, that's like, if you read the Federalist Papers, that's what it's all about. They're worried, that's why they created the Senate and all that kind of stuff. But going back to those kind of common principles that are sort of instilled in you as an American, I think that you can make an argument that we shouldn't have a council of elders sitting on top of society, ruling over us, or being in this absurd moment in an advanced democracy in 2022, where we're sitting here wondering, like, well, how long is this person going to live, and how long is that person going to live, because it has consequential effects.
Yeah, it's like
of our society. It's absurd. It's no way to run a country.
Dynastic crisis in a medieval monarchy. That's like, if the king dies today, then then Prince Edward will take over. But that's like, so we hope that he beats the plague. And yeah, no, exactly. Branko, this does seem very much in your wheelhouse, as of kind of thinking about civil liberties and courts and all that. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, you have to have a highest court of appeal, of course. But I am always astonished by how much power and the Supreme Court in the United States has to just wholesale rewrite laws and just strike down laws and basically be a policy making body, which is, I think, not the way that it was imagined initially. It was meant to be, I guess, sort of a check. But you know, it's, I think, gone well beyond that now. I mean, yeah, court packing is a short-term solution. It's worth doing if it's going to limit the power of it for the moment. If it's going to limit the amount of damage it can do in the short term, it's not going to be a long-term solution. Really, to I think fix what's ailing American democracy, you don't just have to fix the Supreme Court. You would have to really rewrite the entire Constitution, which is obviously a massive endeavor to even imagine. And that would be, at this point, I mean, the people who are most likely to rewrite the Constitution are not, unfortunately, people on the left. There's going to be people who already hold the wealth and power in society. But, you know, that's, I think, what you would have to do to really fix things, because the Supreme Court is really just one thing. I think, people usually think of this kind of thing as Supreme Court is an important check on excesses of the other branches of government. Sure, okay, but at the same time, the Supreme Court, as we have seen, and I think as should be blindingly obvious right now, is not some sort of neutral arbiter, just sort of saying, "Oh, you've gone a little bit too far. I'm going to change that." It's also an entity that is a terrain of political contest, and so does it really make a difference if you have it there or not? Saying, the legislature has gone too far. I don't really think so. There's plenty of countries where it is, there's parliamentary supremacy. Basically, the legislature is the one that decides what's going to be the highest law of the land and what isn't. They work completely fine. You don't, I think, necessarily need the kind of system that you have right now, where you have sort of a court that's sitting there saying this is okay and this isn't, and we're the ones who get to decide. I don't think you really need that.
And also, I just want to add, like, it's a false security. The argument that people always make is like, well, what the Supreme Court is going to protect us in some kind of hypothetical situation where, you have a Congress that wants to, like, limit civil rights. I mean, look at the history of the empowered Supreme Court on that. It's been atrocious, right? From what we've seen in our lifetime, from, Bush just incredibly overstepping the roles of the government when it comes to domestic surveillance, to all the way back to Eugene Debs, when the Supreme Court upheld his imprisonment for speaking out against an imperialist war. I mean, it's just like, there's not a record there that, you should be particularly proud of. And this kind of hypothetical situation, I think you actually need to look at the history, and you can make a pretty convincing argument, in my opinion, that it's not played that role. So why do you think it's going to do in the future, especially in the moment right now where the right has recognized that they can use this very successfully for their own purposes?
Yeah, and I mean, just to piggyback on that point, I mean, I think it's not like the worst things the Supreme Court has ever done are just like upholding bad things that legislatures do. I mean, you mentioned Lincoln earlier. I mean, go back just before that to Plessy versus Ferguson. That the Supreme Court actually took away rights that were already enjoyed. That like there's just no structural reason why that couldn't happen. That there's no I mean, I don't know what this scenario is where you're going to get a Congress that wants to is just going to openly try to legislate away the First Amendment or something, but then the Supreme Court is still going to want it, right? I mean, like wouldn't the political changes that led to that also impact the Supreme Court? And if you are going to empower 9 people to have this kind of level of say, and I agree with Branko that you'd have to there's a lot else that you'd have to fix to
Totally.
which is why I think that you could still say that that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is like a massive loss for democracy on the whole, given that there are different undemocratic things about the American system that are kind of ping-ponging over against each other here. But I still think this idea that you're gonna, I guess I just don't understand, especially if you're a leftist, why you would trust 9 lawyers from Harvard and Yale to do the right thing in these scenarios and be your last line of defense against attempts to take away basic rights. I mean, I think that you have to. I'm sorry, guy. Only you can prevent forest fires, right? I mean, like, only you can protect your basic rights.
Ben, I mean, I think that's the point right there. It's just like, I understand some discomfort that people have with maybe I'm making a radical point here that's out of step with everyone else here, but like, I very much believe when it comes to the American system, we should be trying to push for reforms that bring democracy and power as close to the people as possible, right? And that does mean that you open us up to a lot of different stuff. But I have to say that, like, I feel much more comfortable with being able to play that out in a political sphere where there's a little bit more ability of us to influence it than the current system, which is so far away from people. I mean, the Senate is just like a complete nightmare. The Supreme Court, of course, I mean, there's nothing further away from us than you can imagine in terms of political power, the average American citizen in the Supreme Court, right? I would much prefer to bring these kind of questions and these fights into a political sphere where we can influence them than our current system, which puts them so far away from us, that we have very, very little influence. And yeah, I mean, that does mean that there's open questions about what, would need to happen and all that kind of stuff. But for me personally, I'm much more comfortable with that reality than the present one where we have a severe, democratic lack.
Yeah.
And we also need to impeach some people. Like seriously, like
yeah.
This is basic stuff right here. But I mean, off the top of my head, I can think of plenty of reasons to impeach Thomas and Kavanaugh. Just as for improprieties and maybe Thomas could be forgiven a little bit of some of his sins, but it doesn't look good. Like, he needs to be recusing himself more because of his wife. And that's why he should be impeached. And Kavanaugh, you're like, hey, how did he get all of his debts paid off? How did that happen? We don't know to this point. Like, that we need to find out and probably, impeach him because he, some corrupt figure paid it off. So, right there, we have an avenue to pursue to bring some of that power closer to the people.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I think the reaction to the protests outside of the justices' homes is incredibly revealing, right? Because that's like, what I actually think that the most revealing comment I saw about this is, all right, so there's somebody who is a former guest on the show who I often disagree with, who had posted something about that, and then I sort of said in response, well, hold on, like, people were like protesting outside Chuck Schumer's house a couple of years ago, a bunch. Like, nobody ever thought that was a crisis, like what's why is this a big deal? And not this person, but somebody else that replies was like, well, it's okay to try to influence an elected official, but you can't try to influence a judge. It's like, okay, wait a second. So you have 9 Harvard and Yale educated lawyers who are allowed to rewrite the laws, and you're not even allowed to try to influence them, like, by like waving signs and chanting slogans like that. That doesn't sit right with me.
Well, and also it completely ignores the fact that the Supreme Court is, first of all, a political institution. Second of all, is very keenly aware of public opinion. Like, we know that one of the reasons that Obamacare is still in the books was because Roberts basically wanted to avoid completely destroying the court's image in the eyes of most of the public. So they're very, very well aware of public opinion, and they understand that they, to some extent, are on thin ice. The further and further right they go, the further and further they make these decisions that are wildly unpopular and out of step with most people. So no, they're completely fair game. It's ridiculous to say otherwise.
Do y'all have strong feelings on elections for we have our Supreme Court in Texas is elected, and that comes with a lot too, because I mean, you look at the political situation in Texas. I mean, that means a lot of far right people are getting into power. But I'm just curious if y'all have strong feelings about an election system for a Supreme Court system or not.
Yeah, I feel think it would corrupt the. I feel like it would corrupt the institution even further by bringing money into it. If there's a way to federally fund such said elections, that's a whole different story. But the way our system is right now with Citizens United, it's an open game of like insanity to open that up to further corruption.
Yeah, can you imagine the Supreme Court attack ads? Branko, what were you going to say?
Well, I mean, I was basically going to say the same thing, and I was also going to say that I think it probably would make it maybe a little bit better if you could somehow limit the amount, the influence of money in there. However, at the same time, you still have the fundamental problem that these are a tiny number of people who have this great amount of power, great leeway to basically rewrite law, and that I think is at heart kind of the issue. I just think the Supreme Court just should not have the amount of power it has, the sweeping ability to just kind of say, no, we're not doing that anymore. And actually, this is what they meant by this law when they first wrote it, as interpreted by me.
Yeah, I mean, there is this weird dynamic that happens when people are talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's decision not to retire, and like people who are closer to us will point out that had really bad consequences, and people and then there are like liberals who'll be very defensive about it. But it's like the bigger issue to me than like her extremely unwise decision was just like, how crazy is it that you have a system where like one elderly person's decision on whether or not to retire is going to have that level of consequence for what the laws are that regulate everybody's life.
Well, and also let me just add, as just to throw my New Zealandness in there one more time before I head off. But it's so bizarre to have in the U.S. system. Everyone knows who the Supreme Court justices are and their quasi celebrities. I have no idea who the top-ranking judges in New Zealand are. I don't know their names. I don't know what their exercise regimen is. I don't know anything about them, and that's probably for the best, because that means that they're just sort of like a bureaucrat with very limited scope of what they can actually rule on. But I feel like because of the system here, of course you end up sort of obsessing with these people because they have such a massive amount of power. So it's a symptom of that, but it's a very strange thing. I don't know of any other country where people are this kind of fixated and obsessed on what goes on in the courts. You know what I mean? And who the different personalities are.
I do hope that one of New Zealand's Supreme Court justices is a kakapo.
I think, yeah, that might have some problems. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the way the Supreme Court goes, basically it's just ticking a box, right? It's either, the liberal position or the conservative position. So you probably could just sort of leave it up to, a parrot or an octopus or whoever, and just sort of have them kind of float around and decide what they're going to say on each case. So we'll see.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, this has been really great, guys. And yes, thank you. Let them eat ass. I concur. So
my family is really proud of my involvement with this show, and I'm sure this is only adding to it.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.